9 budgets, hardest one. Think you're in the hardest room for it tonight?
Look,
It feels like night today, sorry.
I've always enjoyed coming to the Victorian Chamber, and I wouldn't have missed this for quids, to be entirely frank. I think, yes, look, cutting to the chase, yes, this is a very difficult budget. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of moving parts. I think one of our advisors says it's a target-rich environment that has been created with all of the moving parts. And one of the things that is difficult, really, at a time when everybody's looking at, well, how do we wind back expenditure, is not to kill the economic opportunities of the state by making investments in the right place to grow opportunity. So, you know, in many ways, we're doing a lot of things in different areas all at once.
You speak of target-rich environment. I feel like there'd be some individuals in the room today who feel like they're a target. You came for them for the mental health levy a couple of years ago. You're coming for them now with a debt levy. Business feels like what were the words yesterday? Cash cow, like an ATM, like a piñata. Why are you coming after business, and how long will you keep coming after business for?
Oh, look, I think business can at least have the confidence that where we can make provision for business, and I think there's the unwritten part of this budget is the enormous reallocation and the tax cuts and opportunities that this budget provides. Yes, I think in net you would have to say that there are certain sections of the business community that would say, particularly at the high end, those who've done particularly well out of COVID in terms of profitability, that they would feel, well, why us? Well, simply because as a government, we need to replenish the capacity of the state. Why do we need to do that? Well, we saw $2 billion worth of expense around floods that afflicted Victorians. We had to step in and look after the well-being of Victorians.
But isn't that the core business of government, not the core business of business?
Well, the core business of government is to look after business when it needs support and assistance, all of which is resourced out of our tax base. And we have to reassess and adjust our tax base based on the needs of the community. But we did put $14 billion into businesses right around the state during the course of COVID to try and keep them whole. And might I say, it demonstrated its worth. Our economy bounced back to be travelling is now travelling about 25% faster than the national economy's average. So we're doing something right in terms of investing, and certainly in terms of creating and growing jobs. We are a long way out in front of the rest of the nation.
The rest of the nation brings up an interesting point. I know you're at pains then to explain we are not the highest taxing state. The Business Council thinks we are. That's the public perception, and you can't go to everyone and give them a 15-minute presentation and a selective graph from the ABS. How do you counter it? What is your pitch to business to come here, to invest here, to stay here when you're the target of new taxes at the whim of a treasurer?
Well, thanks, Heidi. It really was therapy for me more than necessarily an educative process for you. I do bang on about this, and my poor old advisors are just about exhausted by this. The truth is, if you simply cherry pick the data that is being used, and essentially the data that is being used is state taxes and local government taxes. I don't know why we get fitted up with local government taxes, but if you use that data, then on that basis only, you can probably mount a case that Victoria's at the top end. The problem with that is no treasurer, no state, no business interacts with state governments other than in the context of what their revenue base is and who pays to replenish that revenue base. So I've taken you through, well, therapy for me more than anybody else, what is essentially the real allocations. And quite frankly, as a state, we are in a much more business attractive location if you're looking at the costs that you have to pay to the state to run its balance sheet.
But that doesn't seem to be the perception publicly. How do you address that? How do you change that?
Probably by doing a bit more like this. Maybe I'm an inarticulate and ineffective advocate for what I think. I hope that we'll start to see some journalists start to pick this aside and have some genuine engagement about it. But, you know, the fact that this, can I say, banal analysis has been put forward by the opposition and picked up and run with without any criticism, I feel aggrieved.
Just your quick thoughts on a tweet from the Tasmanian Premier in the last little while. Lower taxes, cheaper power in a state that backs small business. If any Victorian businesses want a better deal to provide jobs and opportunity to Tasmanians, we'll welcome you with open arms.
I don't know where Tasmania came on that graph. We might send it down to him for further consideration, but I think Tasmania's still well and truly above us, and the point that I would make in terms of their revenue base, and you know, at the end of the day, from a national perspective, we don't have the Commonwealth Government handing out $500 million for a footy stadium for us. In fact, I'm still trying to get some money for the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, we need something for the Commonwealth Games. I thought they were your friends.
Even my friends sometimes don't give me $500 million when I ask for it, Heidi. But we're gonna work on them. And look, I'm confident they're going to do the right thing. They've given $3 billion to Brisbane for the Olympics. So,
yes. Why aren't they giving things to us, Tim?
They're just playing coy at the moment, but I'm absolutely convinced that they'll do the right thing by the state of Victoria. And if I'm not convinced, I'll let you know in no uncertain terms.
Great. I would like to make sure we throw it open because there are about 400 or so of you here, and I assume there are, given some of the businesses, the industry bodies represented in the room, I assume there are some with some questions to raise, some views to present directly to you, Treasurer. While we wait for a microphone to make their way across, and I'll just get you to give your name, where you're from, and a quick question. We don't really have time for long editorials.
Oh, that's a shame. Tim and I were going to have a good chat. David Jemicki, farmer out the west side of Victoria. One comment, two questions. First of all, when you've got rentals increasing from $200 a week versus $450 a week, that 37% increase in regional areas is still very modest. Second point, being that we talk about net debt, what is my banker always tells me there's a difference between a limit and a target. Where would you prefer the ratio, noting that we're going to get close to 25% out in forward estimates of Victoria's net debt? And then finally, just on renewable energies, agriculture relies very heavily on diesel. Where do you see hydrogen being a part of our net zero targets?
Thanks, David.
There were so many questions here, David. I don't know if I'm going to remember them all. The first one was around the escalation in rents in regional Victoria. And as I say, look, I think I've been pretty able to demonstrate that this is a function of supply and demand, and we know there are enormous difficulties being experienced in regional Victoria, being able to attract skills to those areas, in large measure because they don't have housing stock to get the requisite people into their communities. So this is a problem that we're going to have to deal with as a government and as a community. We've been working on it consistently, whether it's the lifting of the payroll tax-free threshold, the stamp duty tax-free threshold for first home buyers, whether it's our shared equity scheme or all the systems we've put into place to facilitate rent to buy. There is still going to be an enormous effort that will have to be put in, and the government has already announced that we'll be coming out with further initiatives by no later than September of this year, as we recognise that this is a problem and is going to have to be dealt with. The second question was
around net debt.
Net debt. So, what would be my perfect number? Well, it'll probably be 0.1 of 1%, I suppose, but enough to keep a credit rating, but enough never have to worry about paying, $27 billion over a forward estimates period in interest. Look, the truth is I suspect that the first priority for the government is to get that net debt number below 24.5, which is the out years, the final year of the forward estimates. Maybe, as you can see, it's getting close. We're only 0.1 of 1% below equalised or debt having stabilised. We've got to get there. The only way we can stabilise debt is we've got to run operating surpluses on our balance sheet. We still have a lot of COVID expenditure that's leaching its way through our balance sheet, but it's coming off, and that's why we're making the decisions we are around the winding back of the size and scale of the public service.
Any other questions?
There was a third one, but I forget it.
We'll keep... Oh, hydrogen. Diesel
diesel
prices and hydrogen.
Look, our position on blue hydrogen is, and all hydrogen for that matter, but blue hydrogen in particular, is that the government is working through a due diligence analysis of this technology and the proposal that our Japanese business partners are advocating. We won't be finalising our view on it until we've completed that due diligence. The Japanese tell us they've got about 2 years of work to do before they get to a position about whether they make the investments that they're proposing, and we'll work with them, and when we find out whether the technology stacks up in economic terms, in environmental terms and in technological delivery terms, then we'll have a look at it.
I'm conscious time is moving on, so I will ask really for very quick questions if we can, over this side of the room, and then we'll come back here.
Hi, yeah. Treasurer Deb Kerr from the Victorian Forest Products Association. Pretty disappointed about yesterday's decision about native forestry, but we'll put that to one side. You've talked today about the housing supply issues. I'm just wondering when the government and the broader Victorian community are going to have a real discussion about our timber supplies and where they're going to come from. By the time it takes to grow a pine tree in 2053, global demand will outstrip supply 4-1, and we already import 40% of Victoria imports 40% of Australia's structural timber for housing. We need to get serious about this conversation.
All right, thank you. Where are we getting the timber from, Tim? And I will ask a follow-up to that. The 200 million, how much is for business and how much is for the workers with the timber plan?
We'll have a bit more to say about the breakup of those allocations, but make no mistake, we're going to have to work very closely with businesses, particularly those in the harvesting and haulage area, those who run heavy equipment. We're going to need that equipment to keep our fire trails safe, deal with bushfire management and parks management. So certainly from our perspective, the challenges that we've confronted with constant legal actions, look, honestly, have led us to the view, and certainly the legal advice we got from the Solicitor General is that there is no likelihood that we can get to a point where there is certainty of being able to extract resource out of our native forests. I don't say this with any degree of satisfaction or triumphalism, as some on the green side of politics have. We don't do this with any degree of happiness, but we've had people basically sitting at home, basically being paid by the state, while essentially court orders of injuncted activity, and it's just not fair to those communities to pretend that we have a pathway through when the courts and the law doesn't seem to be able to facilitate that.
All right, a question down the middle.
Treasurer, hi, Alan Blood from a firm called Victorian Hydrogen and Ammonia Industries Limited. And thank you for your speech, it was very, very informative. I'm a part West Australian and a part Victorian, so I'm a bit different to a lot of other people. So no comments on GST, please.
Just a nice quick question, please.
Yes. Tim, you have, like West Australia, an enormous resource in your brown coal. Now, no one wants more environmentally polluting industries, but the brown coal can be utilised in a way which is zero emissions for a variety of projects, hydrogen being one and so on. So one of the issues, though, is seemingly conflict within government on environmental aspects. Now, if that huge resource, which is an enormous asset of the state, can be utilised in such a way, it makes zero emissions outcomes, creates the jobs that you want, creates billions of dollars of revenue that you want. It doesn't matter if it's brown coal, bananas or pineapples. It's a resource of the state, of great value to the state. So why don't we use the jolly thing? Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Alan. Look, as a government, we are committed to a process that will see eventually our brown coal emitters wind down. They will essentially, and we hope to see, them being replaced by clean and renewable energy, and that will make a very substantial contribution towards the government's attaining of its renewable energy and its carbon emissions target. In terms of utilisation of brown coal resource into the future, I see it as being relatively limited. We'll go through our due diligence on HESC, but beyond HESC, I think the best thing for this industry would be to wait and see what the government does on HESC, and we haven't yet finalised a view, and it will be a serious and diligent attempt to work through the economic, the environmental and the technological challenges of that project.
Treasurer, well, I think there may have been one more question over this side around the, I think I recognise the moustache of the real estate gentleman. Quinton, is that you? We'll get a microphone to you, hold on. In the meantime, the contingency funds that you've set aside for all of the projects while you wait for the Commonwealth Games cash, is it like a very big fund? How confident are you that that Commonwealth money is going to come for all of those projects that are on hold?
Oh, well, most of the contingency that you're seeing, far and away most of it, is basically put aside for a number of reasons that are generally predictable. On the output side of the ledger, it tends to be around demand in our hospital system and our education system.
I mean, particularly the projects, though.
So, capital side of the ledger, most of it is held largely for LFS projects or projects that are currently out in a competitive process in the market. So, we're not going to tell the people that we're trying to extract value from exactly what price we think it should go for, otherwise we do the taxpayer a disservice. So I hold those monies and I release them to delivery agencies and ministers once we have confidence in them, and essentially that's as it should be, I think.
Question?
Thank you, Heidi. To Treasurer, two parts. Very quickly, though, just to correct some of your narrative, and while I like to correct your budget, I will correct the narrative. The vacancy rate you quoted is not actually 12%, it's closer to 1.2%, which is a little bit different to 12%, but there we go. You talked about supply and demand. Now, Treasurer, your budget contained no measures to alleviate the current supply issues in the residential rental market, which is, as you state, the underlying cause of this rental crisis we're in. It did, however, increase the taxation burden on family investors who make up 70% of Victoria's rent providers and small business owners. These are the same people who, through COVID, were mandated to provide rental relief and are now trying to make ends meet with rising costs. So my question to you is, how is your government planning to address the increasing pressures on renters in Victoria when, as a result of these tax increases, we see more rental providers and small business owners leaving the sector and thereby further diminishing supply and putting more upward pressure on costs?
Thanks for that, and I apologise if I read 12%. It was 1.2%. That was the number my staff put in my speech. So
you cannot throw staff under the bus.
Yeah, it was the number my staff put on. No, what I was saying is I got it wrong, not my staff. It only further highlights my point that this is an issue around the fact that we don't have enough supply into the market. So we all agree on that. What's the government doing about it? We are basically, as we've been doing consistently, remember this is a government that produced a Homes for Victorians strategy about 2 years into our term, and we've been consistently pursuing policies aimed to generate more activity. We do understand that there are multifaceted parts to this industry. It's not just about home ownership, but that's something we certainly, from a policy perspective, promote and encourage. And that's why our policy settings promote and encourage getting people into their first home. But we also have to recognise that renters need a fair deal, and we've legislated a fairer deal for renters. And we need to recognise that the state has to be prepared to use innovative methods to encourage people getting into their home. So if you're a first home buyer or somebody looking for a principal place of residence, the state, in a nation-leading approach through our Home Buyer Fund, will take 25% equity in a qualifying applicant's home so that we could take some of the some of the mortgage insurance costs off them, so that we take effectively a quarter of the mortgage repayments off them, and we make it easier for them to get the asset that better fits their needs. So we're doing a lot in this space. I absolutely accept there is more that we need to do, and that's why the Premier has announced that the government will be producing a housing and planning strategy towards sometime in September.
3 more very quick ones from me, Treasurer. I'll ask quick questions. You give quick answers, I should hope. Any plans to introduce a rent freeze?
Look, I've certainly, from my perspective, I think governments getting involved in the issue of putting a freeze on rents would be a massive distortion of the market. I think there is an issue that we have to deal with, and that is why rents are rising as quickly as they are, and what can we do to avoid those rises being as great as they are.
Was that a yes or was that a yes or a no? Yeah.
Well, rent freeze is a definite no.
Definite no, right?
Can we do more around stopping the increase in rents at the disproportionately high level that they are at the moment? Metropolitan Melbourne, 25%. I think we can do more.
With a rent cap?
Let's think about it. We don't have a firm view, but I do think there has to be a point at which the community says this has gone beyond reason. The level that probably some of the poorest people who are not asset rich at all are getting encumbered with costs. And 1 in 3 Victorian households rent, and they do need and deserve the attention and support of government.
Won't a cap be an intervention?
Well, I'm not suggesting that we won't intervene in the way that the housing market operates. We've been doing that with great regularity in an attempt to get a more equitable way that the market operates. It's a question of what interventions are the most appropriate.
Those were supplementary questions. My second last question is this. I know you liked Paul Guerra's idea around stamp duty relief, stamp duty changes for commercial properties and business properties. What about payroll tax? Any plans to consider some fairly sizable changes to payroll tax as a whole?
What do you got in mind?
Get rid of it?
Well, if you can find $8 billion for me as an alternative to it, sure. Or we could have open air schools as an alternative, Heidi.
All right, fine. And my final question is that the Premier appeared at the budget lock-up yesterday. I don't recall him ever doing that. Some of the reasons put to me for it were he was trying to steal your thunder, he was helping you with a tough sell, or it was his last one, so he thought he'd pop in. Whose idea was it for him to swing by?
Believe me, he wasn't trying to steal my thunder. The unwritten story of this budget is exactly how hands-on the Premier has been, and quite frankly, we had a chat last night about it, and I said, look, I could not have landed this budget without him, and I mean that quite genuinely. He gets it. He understands the nature of the fiscal challenges that we confront, and he's prepared to back his Treasurer in. So he could. I said to him, "You can do the budget presentation if you want. You're much more articulate than me." But of course, he figures, well, Treasurer's got to do his job.
So was his idea to come or yours?
It was his idea to come, but when he floated it with me saying it's up to you, I said, of course you can come. You can do my speech if you want. So believe me, I am very much indebted to the Premier for the incredible work that he's put in during this budget, and I don't think he gets the level of acknowledgement he should.
Treasurer, thank you.